Silver on the Tree by Susan Cooper. On the day of the dead, when the year dies too, must the youngest open the oldest hills. Through the door of the birds, where the breeze breaks, their fire shall fly from the raven boy, and the silver eyes that see the wind, and the light shall have the harp of gold. By the pleasant lake the sleepers lie, on Cadfan's way, where the kestrels call. Though grim from the grey king shadows fall, yet singing the golden harp shall guide, to break their sleep and bid them ride. When light from the lost land shall return, 6 sleepers shall ride, 6 signs shall burn. And where the midsummer tree grows tall, by Pendragon's sword the dark shall fall. Part 1. When the Dark Comes Rising. Chapter 1. Midsummer's Eve. Will said, turning a page, "He liked woad. He says, listen, the decoction of woad drunken is good for wounds in bodies of a strong constitution, as of a country people, and such as are accustomed to great labour and hard coarse fare. Such as me and all other members of His Majesty's Navy," Stephen said. With great precision he pulled a tall, heavy-headed stem of grass out of its sheath and lay back in the field nibbling it. "Woad," said James, wiping a mist of sweat from his plump pink face. "That's the blue stuff the ancient Britons used to paint themselves with." Will said, "Gerald says here that woad flowers are yellow." James said rather pompously, "Well, I've done a year's more history than you have, and I know they used it for blue." There was a pause. He added, "Green walnuts turn your fingers black." "Oh, well," said Will. A very large velvety bee overloaded with pollen landed on his book and waddled dispiritedly across the page. Will blew it gently on a leaf, pushing back the straight brown forelock that flopped over his eyes. His glance was caught by a movement on the river beyond the field where he lay. "Look, swans!" Lazy as the hot summer day, a pair of swans sailed slowly by without a sound. Their small wake lapped at the riverbank. "Where?" said James, clearly with no intention of looking. "They like this bit of the river. It's always quiet. The big boats stay over in the main reach even on a Saturday." "Who's coming fishing?" said Stephen, but he still lay unmoving on his back, one long leg folded over the other, the slender stem of grass swaying between his teeth. "In a minute," James stretched, yawning. "I ate too much cake." "Mum's picnics are as huge as ever?" Stephen rolled over and gazed at the grey-green river. "When I was your age, you couldn't fish at all in this part of the Thames. Pollution, then. Some things do improve." "A paltry few," Will said, sepulchrally, out of the grass. Stephen grinned. He reached out and picked a slender green stalk with a tiny red flower. Solemnly he held it up. "Scarlet Pimpernel. Open for sun, closed for rain. That's the poor man's weather vane. Grandad taught me that. Pity you never knew him. What does your friend Mr. Gerald say about this one, Will?" Will was lying on his side, watching the weary bumblebee flex its wings. "Book," James said. "Scarlet Pimpernel. Oh!" Will turned to the crackling pages. "Here it is. Oh, lovely. The juice purgeth the head by gargarising or washing the throat therewith. It cures the toothache, being sniffed up into the nostrils, especially into the contrary nostril." "The contrary nostril, of course," said Stephen gravely. "He also says it's good against the stinging of vipers and other venomous beasts." "Daft," said James. "No, it's not," Will said mildly. "Just 300 years old. There's one super bit at the end where he tells you very seriously how barnacle geese are hatched out of barnacles." "The Caribbean might have foxed him," Stephen said. "Millions of barnacles, but not one barnacle goose." James said, "Will you go back there after your leave?" "Wherever their lordships send us, mate." Stephen threaded the Scarlet Pimpernel into the top buttonhole of his shirt and unfolded his lanky body. "Come on, fish." "I'll come in a minute. You two go." Will lay idly, watching as they fitted rods together, tied hooks and floats. Grasshoppers skirted unseen from the grass, chirruping their solos over the deep summer insect hum. It was a sleepy, lulling sound. He sighed with happiness. Sunshine and high summer, and rarer than either, his eldest brother home from the sea. The world smiled on him. Nothing could possibly be improved. He felt his eyelids droop. He jerked them apart again. Again they closed in slippery content. Again he forced them open. For a flicker of a moment, he wondered why he would not let himself fall harmlessly asleep. Then he knew. The swans were there on the river again, slow-moving white shapes drifting back upstream. Over Will's head, the trees sighed in the breeze like waves on distant oceans. In tiny yellow-green bunches, the flowers of the sycamore scattered the long grass around him. Running one of them between his fingers, he watched Stephen standing tall a few yards off, threading his fishing line through his rod. Beyond, on the river, he could see one of the swans moving slowly ahead of its mate. The bird passed Stephen, but as it passed, it did not disappear behind Stephen. Will could see the white form clearly through the outline of Stephen's body. And through the outline of the swan, in turn, he could see a steep slope of land, grassy without trees, that had not been there before. Will swallowed. "Steve," he said. His eldest brother was close before him, knotting a leader on his line, and Will had spoken loudly, but Stephen did not hear. James came past, holding his rod erect but low, as he fastened the hook safely into its cork handle. Will could still see, through him, the forms of the swans, as if in a faint mist. He sat up and stretched out his hand to the rod as James went by, and his fingers moved through the substance of the wood, as if there had been nothing there. And Will knew, with dread and delight, that part of his life, which had been sleeping, was broad awake once more. His brothers walked off to the river, moving diagonally across the field. Through their phantom forms, Will could see the only earth that in this elusive patch of time was for him solid and real, the grassy slope, its edges merging into mistiness. And on it he saw figures, running, bustling, driven by some urgent haste. If he stared at them too hard, they were not there. But if he gazed with sleepy eyes, not quite focused, he could see them all, sun-dappled, hurrying. They were small, dark-haired. They belonged to a very distant time. They wore tunics of blue, green, or black. He saw one woman in white with a string of bright blue beads about her neck. They were gathering bundles of spears, arrows, tools, sticks, packing pots into wrappings of animal skin, putting together packages of what he supposed was meat in dry, rippled strips. There were dogs with them, full-haired dogs with short, pointed muzzles. Children ran and called, and a dog lifted his head to bay, but no sound came. For Will's ears, only the grasshoppers chirruped over the deep insect hum. He saw no animals but the dogs. Then these people were travelers, not belonging here but passing through. He was not even sure whether the land on which they stood, in their own time, lay in his own part of the Thames Valley, or in some totally different place, but he knew one thing very clearly suddenly. They were all very much afraid. Often they raised their heads fearfully and gazed away to the east. They spoke seldom to one another, but worked on hastily. Someone was coming, threatening them, driving them on. They were running away. Will found himself catching the sense of urgency, willing them to hurry, to escape. Whatever disaster was on its way. Whatever disaster. He too stared eastward. But it was hard to tell what he saw. A strange double landscape lay before him. A firm, curving slope, visible through the phantom misty lines of the flat fields and hedges of his own day, and the glimmering half-seen Thames. The swans were still there, and yet not there. One of them dipped its elegant neck to the surface of the water, ghostly as an image reflected on a window pane. And all at once, the swan was real, solid, opaque, and Will was no longer looking out of his own time into another. The travelers were gone, out of sight in that other summer day, thousands of years before. Will shut his eyes, desperately trying to hold some image of them before it faded from his memory. He remembered a pot, glinting with the dull sheen of bronze, a cluster of arrows tipped with sharp black flakes of flint. He remembered the dark skin and eyes of the woman in white, and the bright luminous blue of the string of beads about her neck. Most of all, he remembered the sense of fear. He stood up in the long grass, holding his book. He could feel his legs trembling. Unseen in a tree over his head, a song thrush poured out its trilling twice-over song. Will walked shakily toward the river. James' voice hailed him. "Will, over here! Come and see!" He veered blindly toward the sound. Stephen, the purest fisherman, stood casting delicately out into the river, his line whispering through the air. James was threading a worm on his hook. He put it down and triumphantly held up a cluster of 3 small perch, tied through the gills. "Goodness," Will said. "That was quick." Before he could regret the word, James was raising an eyebrow. "Not specially. You been asleep? Come on, get your rod." "No," said Will, to both question and command, Stephen glancing round at him. Suddenly, he let his line go slack. He looked hard at Will, frowning. "Will, are you all right? You look—" "I do feel a bit funny," Will said. "Sun, I bet. Beating down on the back of your neck while you were sitting there reading that book? Probably. Even in England it can get pretty fierce, matey. Flaming June and Midsummer's Eve at that." "Go and lie down in the shade a while, and drink the rest of that lemonade." "All of it?" said James indignantly. "What about us?" Stephen aimed a kick at him. "You catch 10 more perch and I'll buy you a drink on the way home. Go on, Will, under the trees." "All right," said Will. "I told you that book was daft," James said. Will crossed the field again and sat down in the cool grass beneath the sycamore trees, beside the remains of their picnic tea. Sipping lemonade slowly from a plastic cup, he looked uneasily out at the river, but all was normal. The swans had gone, midges danced in the air, the world was heavy with heat. His head ached. He put aside the cup and lay on his back in the grass, looking up. Leaves danced above him. The branches breathed and swayed to and fro, shifting green patterns against the blue sky. Will pressed his palms to his eyes, remembering the faint hurrying forms that had flickered up to him out of the past, remembering the fear. Even afterwards, he could never tell whether he fell asleep. The sighing of the breeze seemed to grow louder, more fierce. All at once he could see different trees above him, beech trees, their heart-shaped leaves dancing agitated in a wilder swirl than sycamore or oak. And this now was not a hedge line of trees stretching unbroken to the river, but a copse. The river was gone, the sound and smell of it, and on either side of him Will could see the open sky. He sat up. He was high over the wooded valley of the Thames, on a curving grassy slope. The cluster of beech trees around him marked the top of the hill like a cap. Golden vetch grew in the short springy grass at his side. From one of the curled flowers a small blue butterfly fluttered to his hand and away again. There was no more heavy hum of insects in the valley fields. Instead, high over his head, through the stirring of the wind, a skylark's song pounced bubbling into the air. And then, somewhere, Will heard voices. He turned his head. A string of people came hurrying up the hill, each darting from one tree or bush to the next, avoiding the open slope. The first 2 or 3 had just reached a curious deep hole sunk into the hill, so closely overgrown by brush that he would not have noticed it if they had not been there, tugging branches aside. They were laden with bundles wrapped in rough dark cloth, but so hastily wrapped that Will could see the contents jutting through. He blinked. There were gold cups, plates, chalices, a great gold cross crusted with jewels, tall candlesticks of gold and silver, robes and cloths of glimmering silk woven with gold and gems. The array of treasures seemed endless. The figures bound each bundle with rope and lowered one after another into the hole. Will saw a man in the robes of a monk who seemed to be supervising them, directing, explaining, always keeping a nervous watch out over the surrounding land. And we'll pause there.